that gives you
The bit at the end, yeah.
You don't have to forge it.
Yeah.
You just take them down, grind them up, and they're done.
Oh, that's cunning. Oh, I like that. I might have to alter it.
This is a terrible fire at the moment. Too much flame. We'll settle down though.
Looks good.
So easy. Ignore me. Lovely.
That's better. Nice even wool thickness.
Lovely.
I'm going to take a little bit off just to finish it off. For people are touching it then. You saw the little sparks
Yeah.
coming off the end.
Just
That's
fizzing,
what you
yeah.
need. And
She's all done.
we'll finish him over there. Basically, some of this I do is a modern finish, you know, for,
Yeah.
for modern archers. So I'm going to just finish that bit off there. But this piece, they would have done exactly what I'm doing. And when I'm doing it, if you watch the sparks, when I get to the end there, the sparks change. And that will tell you whether it's hard or not.
Okay.
With those sparks coming off. There we are. On Cressy Warhead.
Beautiful.
Too warm.
Oh, thanks, Hector.
Yeah.
Hello, Hector.
Hello.
How are you doing?
Okay, thank you, Tim.
Brilliant. Well, thank you for inviting us into your workshop today. It's been great to watch a master craftsman at work.
It's been my pleasure.
Brilliant. It's been nice to see watch you make your bodkin and
Yes.
finish it and talking us through the process. We're joined by your apprentice today.
Well, not formal.
The correct word is improver.
Improver. Beg my pardon. So yes, this is Simon, for those who are watching, otherwise known as Red to
Yes.
the rest of us. And Dave's here as well in the background doing all the tech gumph.
Indeed.
So yeah, I
Yeah,
guess we
good.
should probably start with a bit about your background really.
Oh gosh, yes. Well, it goes back a long,
Yeah.
long way now.
Yeah.
Back to when I was very, very small, stood on a box by the side of the hearth in the village blacksmith shop, pumping the bellows.
Wow.
That's how far back it goes.
What year would that have been?
I would like to say.
Okay. All right, we can.
But, and from there,
Yeah.
that's where I learned fire management, how to look after the fire. And when the blacksmith wasn't using the hearth, I would have a piece of metal in hammering away.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
but then that's where I started, and that's where the love came from.
Yes.
And it's never left me. I still love doing it. It's a pleasure always.
Yeah.
Yes, a bit frustrating at times. Yes, when things don't quite go right, but
Yeah.
on the whole, no, I love what I'm doing. And I love the direction that I've gone in
Yes.
from doing what I would call domestic work, which is pokers, toasting forks, fire irons and things in the house. But from that I moved on a little bit to repairing antique items in the house.
Yeah.
So that led me into working wrought iron,
Yeah.
which is something that wasn't being done really at that time.
No.
And blacksmithing was a dying craft.
Yeah.
So
So
it
what
was
decade
good.
would this have been, Hector?
Sir?
What decade would this have been?
We're talking about the 1960s.
Yeah, that's what I
Yeah.
thought. Yeah. Yeah. So even back then, it was on the down.
Oh yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
But there was a big revival in 1980.
Yes.
We had a big international conference with smiths from all around the world,
Wow.
literally. And that was a big eye-opener for everybody who attended.
Yeah.
And that's when blacksmithing took off as we know it today. And it was a gentleman called Dick Quinnell who set up the British Artist Blacksmith Association. And that has really gelled blacksmithing together in this country.
Yeah. Are you still a member of that now?
I've always been a member
Yeah.
right from the beginning.
Yeah.
And we have, the British Smiths have a good worldwide reputation for the work they do. Modern and traditional.
Yeah.
I just branched off into medieval and historic work, and in particular swords and arrowheads.
Mm.
And it was the arrowheads, being a longbowman of course,
Yes.
you want to have the correct arrows, heads on the end of your arrow, and that's how I started.
So, when would that have been exactly?
1970s I started
1970s,
doing that.
So, was there anybody you could learn from about making medieval arrowheads at the time?
No, there was no one. There was
So
no
you-
one
yeah.
actually forging arrowheads.
No.
I had a gentleman come to me, he wanted some medieval studs to go on a belt that he'd been told I could make them.
Yes.
And as he walked out of the workshop, he saw my quiver and said, "Oh, you're an archer, aren't you?" I said, "Yes, I'm a longbowman." He said, "Oh, can I have a look?" When he pulled the arrows out of the quiver, saw the heads and said, "Where did you get those from?" And like a fool, I said, "I made them."
Was this a mutual friend of ours?
This is Tony Harcourt,
Yes. Yeah.
dear Tony.
Yeah. Late Tony now,
yeah.
unfortunately. I was
Yeah.
very lucky to know him briefly for a few years. But he always spoke about you as
Yeah.
often as he could.
Yeah.
So sorry, you do carry on.
Well, no, well, from that, you know, it just went wild. And all the people shooting longbows wanted arrowheads.
Yeah.
And then, of course, Hugh Saw came into the scene.
Yeah.
And
So for people who don't know who Hugh is,
Hugh Saw was the authority. He's written books on medieval archers
Yeah.
and battles and everything.
Yeah.
And
And
we
heavily
went on
involved.
from there.
Yeah, heavily involved in the guild as well.
Yes, he
Yeah.
developed the guild for Bowyers and Fletcher's Guild,
Yeah.
traditional guild.
Yeah.
That was
Which-
very good.
The smithing side, I suppose you wrote the syllabus
Yes.
for that.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. So how many people have you had through that program, like roughly to date now?
Not many. There aren't many people that. A lot of people I've run courses on arrowsmithing,
Mm.
but it's always basic,
Yeah.
just bodkins. Very seldom get on to the more complicated heads because you need more tooling to do it.
Mm.
And most people will make the ordinary bodkins, the one-piece ones. But once you get on to the two-part heads, like the Westminster Type 16s and the curved broad heads and the devices swallowtails, the
Yeah.
Type 15s, then that's a totally different kettle of fish altogether.
Yeah.
And to know how to do them properly does take time and a lot of practice, as Red is finding out.
Indeed. So going back a little bit, so there's nobody doing arrowheads
No.
in the 70s.
No.
So you were literally figuring it all out yourself.
I had to work it all out.
Or based off of.
I
what
based
we have
it
available.
on my blacksmithing experience
Mm.
and once I'd really started doing it, going to museums and getting permission to look at the heads and measure them and look in detail. It's the fine detail that you have to look at to work out how they were being made.
Yeah.
And from there, you try it out, you experiment. Tooling, you know, a lot of tooling I had to make. Some was no good at all, so you scrap it, and you end up with the basic tooling, which works. And the whole aim is to make a good quality arrowhead. And that's what I've always aimed at. That is as historically accurate as possible.
Yeah.
We were talking earlier about what the most important thing you wanted to talk about was, and you said accuracy.
Yeah.
And I remember we talked last time I was up, you were saying that you knew you were on the right track in how to make an arrowhead when you saw the same tool marks on one that you'd made and one.
That's right, yes. It's looking at that fine detail. And that has always been my criteria as to whether I'm forging them correctly, as to if it comes out the same as the original, then yes. But I've always had that little niggling feeling that somewhere up there's an arrowsmith saying, why the hell are you doing it like that? Why don't you? And possibly, you know, there would be somebody saying that, but I haven't found him yet.
It'd be nice to hear those voices.
Yeah.
You know, the way I make them isn't the only way to make arrowheads. No, the people have their own methods.
Yeah.
But what you're doing, you're trying to get it down to what they would have been doing in the medieval period. And the warheads, the one-piece ones, they would be churning those out by the thousand. And you know, if you go into the rolls of Henry III from the Tower of London, you know, look at the quantities that they were making and having to make to supply, you realise that arrowsmithing was a major industry. And even with John Melmore, the King's Quarreller, he was paid 10 pence per 100 for a quarrel. Now, whether it was an arrow for the bow or a quarrel for the crossbow, we don't know. But out of that 10 pence, 7.5 pence was for the head.
Wow.
So it just shows, because making the steel at that time, the iron that they used, that was expensive. You didn't waste any of it.
No.
And so, you know, it was a major industry. And
With teams of people.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And you did it all day long.
Yeah.
Oh. Not on high days and holidays.
Yeah, yeah. So a production line.
Yeah, it was, yes.
Yeah. Much like what we suppose the bow shops might have been as well.
Yes.
You know, the apprentices sort of roughing things out, and
Yeah,
probably the master bowyer
yeah.
doing the nicer work,
Yeah.
tillering
And if you read Ascham's notes on arrowheads, they were particular about them, and they were looking at quality. And most of the heads that I have examined are all of a very high standard.
Yes.
They weren't churning them out and, yeah, that'll do. There was never that about it. They were all made very well.
Yeah. So the material of the period,
Yes.
quite different from probably what
Oh,
most people
yes.
can get to
The,
hand these days.
the materials that I use on the whole now
Mm.
is mild steel.
Yeah.
It's perfectly good enough for the job. And they would be happy with it in medieval times. But they used iron.
Yeah.
They used wrought iron, and if they could get it, they used what we call phosphoric iron, because the phosphorus in the iron makes it more difficult to work, but it does impart a little bit of hardness. If it's non-phosphoric iron, it's nice and soft,
Yeah.
beautiful to work with. But if it hits something, if it's an arrowhead, it doesn't penetrate, it curls up. And you get evidence of it, you know, in
Yeah.
archaeological evidence.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
So modern wrought iron isn't always of the same quality or the same. Like, isn't.
It varies, the
fine.
quality varies according to the ore that they used and how much they worked it to get them. You have to work wrought iron up. You don't take it from the furnace and just hammer it and that's it. You work it, you fold it, you weld it back in on itself until you get it to a nice fine grain in the iron, because that is the secret of iron. Wrought iron has a grain just like wood, and the finer that grain, the better the iron is. And you only get that by working it. Now this one, that is the imprint of the socket.
Oh right, okay.
Oops.
Yeah.
So it's all there. And that was from...
They're larger than I expect, you know. When,
Oh
when
yeah,
you, when you see
it
them.
is.
Yeah.
But you know, you can't get more. You see, there's another profile of it. Imprint of blade.
Yeah.
And this is all, you see all the working it out. Total weight, 341 grams. She's got it at 12mm socket outside. I don't think it is. If you measure that, it's under.
Yeah.
It's about 11 and a half.
So is that because they're tapering it down at the front of the shaft, or is that the shafts were?
No, they just made them. I don't think they were too worried about socket.
Do you think we're overthinking it now?
Yeah, we do. Yeah.
Yeah.
And as now, the Smiths, okay, they were making them more or less to the same pattern, but they had their own, you know, their own personality was in the heads.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, I can recognise Will's heads, I can recognise John's heads, and they'll recognise mine, and we're all doing the same.
Yeah. Yeah.
I recognise yours as well. They were literally churning them out.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it?
These.
So, yeah. But
You
they're
know, they
for
were-
a different purpose, aren't
Oh,
they?
yeah.
So the ones that we're making now are we're trying to make them in the same way, but they're for a very different purpose. They're
Yes.
for like repeated shooting,
Yes.
and we're using different materials and different
Yeah.
ways of finishing them.
Yeah.
We were talking earlier about like overbuilding
Yeah.
equipment now compared
But
to what it
but
was.
they did grind them as I do. Okay, I use a modern linisher, but the big old grindstones were just as efficient, provided you've got somebody to turn the handle,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
somebody did all day long.
Yeah.
You know,
And that's another difference, isn't it? So there would have been teams of people doing this, and now it's one person doing
Yeah.
all the stages,
yeah.
more or less. Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, that would go into a bucket,
Yeah.
and off it would go to be ground up, and then do the points afterwards.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there's your Cressy head.
Nice.
So that would have been the smelter's job. That would have been the smelter's job to.
Yeah,
prepare.
the smelters, they smelted the iron, and they made it from the bloom out of the furnace into a billet.
Yes.
And then that billet made into a particular shape, either a sort of a pyramid shape with a hook on the top, or elongated like a sword blade, thin sword blade, or a rectangular billet that tapered at each end. And they then sent that out to the smiths. And the smiths would have a look at that iron, and they would try it before they bought it. And there's evidence of it in the iron that we found in the trade bars.
Yeah.
And you chose your iron for what you were doing.
Yeah, yeah.
Some
So
of it was
did you-
good, some of it wasn't. And of course, you also had to buy it.
Yeah.
So you bought what you could afford, but they didn't waste any of it, you see.
No.
All the little offcuts that we throw into the bin nowadays, they didn't.
No.
They piled them all up, welded them together, and made more iron.
Yeah. So, arrowsmiths are probably more than any profession looking for the best quality.
They would want
Iron?
good quality
Yeah.
phosphoric iron.
Yes. But if you're doing more sort of door hinges or something. Not so much a concern, possibly.
Yeah.
Because it's very fine work. I mean, I've done one of your courses, and it's
Oh, yes.
incredibly difficult to
Yes.
form an arrowhead. Yeah.
But you know, with the iron, usually they use the iron for the bodkins and for the sockets. But some of them, they then had steel for the barbs to make it that little bit harder, so that it would penetrate.
So that's what when we see in the record them talking about steeled heads. Is that what they're talking about?
Yeah.
I think?
Askham talks about they wish they would steel the heads a bit more.
Yeah.
It's a funny expression, I know, but it gives you a better cutting edge and that little bit harder, so that they don't curl up.
So have you got an opinion on? I know lots of people have done art or are still doing videos on arrow armour penetration.
Yes.
And you know the results are fairly varied, but I just wondered what your opinion on it would be, because you obviously work with the business end of an arrow, you know.
Yeah, well, it's ever so simple. It's whether the arrow will penetrate the armour.
Yeah.
And it depends on A, the quality of the armour, and B, the quality of the arrowhead. And, you know, yes, they did penetrate armour because we proved it. No, they didn't penetrate armour because we proved it. It didn't always work.
Yeah.
But you not only take that in mind, you know, when we were testing them at the Shrivenham College, and we had the ballistics experts there, and we were shooting at iron plate, and we got up to 3 millimetre thick, and the arrows bounced off.
Yeah.
And we said, oh, he's okay then. But the surgeon there said, hang on a minute, just measure how far that plate has gone into that body putty. We did, and he said, yeah, that chap has 2 broken ribs and a ruptured spleen. He's out the battle. You see, it's not just the penetration, it's the hit. It's the jewel's energy when it hits you. Can do just as much damage. And even if it wasn't fully impacting on you, if you got hit, you would know, and it would be disconcerting. I'd be worried anyway.
Yeah, I'm not in a rush to volunteer, so you know, be it part of an experiment.
So, you know, basically, yes, if they do penetrate, it helps. But if they don't, you know, an arrow coming from a 140 pound bow at 50 yards or less, that is deadly. It would hurt.
And I guess the steel they use for the armour bow, not a homogeneous material, so there would be weaker points in it.
It depends who you were. If you were the aristocracy and royalty, you would have top quality armour and you would be reasonably okay. But for most people it wouldn't. It would be ordinary sheet that you know you could get hold of.
So a suit of armour though, we're talking house money.
Oh gosh, yes.
I heard a duke or an earl, his set of armour would have cost in today's money what 1.5 million. But that was like right at the top end of the scale. But obviously, you know, most people wouldn't have been buying that.
And as we progressed through the Middle Ages, the armourers became more skilled and using more iron that could be hardened. And that is a skill in itself, to actually harden the breastplate so that they will glance off. And that's why they're curved, because arrows will glance off and shatter. And we think that that's what happened with Prince Hal at the Battle of Shrewsbury. It wasn't an arrow straight from the bow. We think it glanced off and then hit him. Because if it had been straight from the bow, it would have gone out the back of his head. This is a piece of medieval iron.
Where did you get that?
This, if you look at it, that's a bar goes through there, and there'd be another bar there, and it's out of a window beholding a stained glass window in a building, a church.
Yeah. So you've been looting churches.
And I know where this one came from
Right.
and when it was put in, because of the shape of the window.
Okay. Yeah. So it's dated
Yeah.
dated that way. Oh,
Yeah.
That's interesting.
So this is medieval iron. So we'll do a medieval Cressy warhead,
Awesome.
and we'll just go through it stage by stage. Because there's a difference when you're working wrought iron to working mild steel.
That would be good to know.
Yeah, mild steel is very forgiving. Wrought iron doesn't allow any mistakes.
Fun.
Okay, right, let's see how we get on then. First thing, some people don't bother with this little bit of the process, but I like to, and that is preparing the end. So that when you roll the socket, you don't have a big gap in the top of your socket to be ground off afterwards.
So that's flattening the top of
As
the
flat as you
spoon
possibly
shape.
can.
Yeah.
You won't get them perfect, but you get them as good as you can. And if you don't prepare the end, then they won't come out right.
And I guess it saves the time on grinding and
Yeah,
evening
yeah.
afterwards. So,
Absolutely.
so in a kind of production line, right?
Yeah.
That's exactly what
Yeah.
you want to do.
You know,
Even that.
as the arrowsmith, I don't do the grinding. Once I've forged it, it's off. I've finished. But that was in the medieval times.
Yeah.
Nowadays, I haven't got anybody to do it for me. You can never guarantee the quality of the iron.
So you mentioned before there's a big difference between
Yeah.
like 1850s onwards iron.
No, doesn't matter when it was made and how well it was made.
So what's the difference in production?
Well, if it's poor, it will split
Yeah.
and snap off, all that sort of thing. If it's good iron, it will flow beautifully.
So you've talked before about puddled iron.
Yeah, yeah, but this is smelted.
So okay. Well, that's busy.
So just getting that end square, and then taking it down. So I've got him there like that, you see. Nice and square across the end, and wide enough.
So we were talking just now about the materials used to make heads, and one thing we've been like chatting about is that now for warbow archery, we're using different materials, but because we're overbuilding things, because we're using them differently. So the way in which arrows and bows were used in historic times is very different to how we're using them now. We're shooting the same arrow multiple times. Do you think we should just be making heads out of carbon steel? I'm being provocative.
Because of what you have just said,
Yeah.
you know, people are testing.
Mm.
And if you would just take one arrowhead as per medieval normal and you use it, chances are you won't use it again. But they don't want that, of course, it's too expensive. So yes, I have made heads out of what we call medium carbon steel
Yeah.
and put a bit of the hardness in them so that they can keep using them until they snap them off the shaft.
Yeah.
But they didn't do that in medieval times.
So the kind of balance there is
Yeah.
with historical accuracy. And
Yes.
you've said that the most important thing is accuracy in the research and trying to replicate
Yeah.
what has gone. And I was wondering if you could talk more about your love of historical accuracy, because it's not just about arrows and arrowheads, it's all the other work you've done.
Oh yes,
For museums
yeah,
and things.
absolutely. You know, the bows are good today, just as good as they were years ago. And you know, the bows, they were making the bows out of whatever material they could, the wood anyway. As you know, I know a bit about it, not like you, Tim, as an expert, but
Okay.
you know, a good yew bow is a good bow.
Yeah.
and it shoots beautifully, but they have a limited life.
Yeah, especially heavy bows. Yeah.
Because the heavy bows, you're putting them under an awful lot of pressure.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah, problems do creep up,
Yeah.
If you've got a heavy bow and throughout its life, you don't get any sort of lifts or damage, occurring, you're doing pretty well,
Yeah.
But use the best of what they had available.
Yes.
Arguably, laminated bows these days are more durable, you could argue. Do they shoot as well? Probably not quite as good, but does the cost?
But I have an ash bow out there.
Yeah.
It is a good heavy one.
Yeah.
But I haven't shot him for a long time.
Yeah.
And it's interesting in the rolls from the Royal Armourers, they talk about white bows
Yes.
and painted bows.
Mm.
Now, what are we talking about there, you see?
Yeah, the green painted bow or something. Yeah, well, a friend of ours who did the first episode of the podcast, he's been sort of trying to figure that out, but as of yet he hasn't told me a sort of definitive explanation.
See, a white bow, ash
white
is a
wood.
white.
Yeah.
And a painted one, where you've got the two contrasting colours in the
like
hue.
the Birmingham as well.
Yeah.
The
But then, when I'm doing my research, I do look. I nearly got thrown out of the National Gallery because I was going around all the medieval section with my nose up against the paintings, not looking at, somebody doing this, but looking at all the archery stuff. And I went round every actual painting and I noted everything on there. And then you look at that, and I've always had a lot of faith in artists, with one or two exceptions, that they painted what was accurate.
Yeah.
And especially the martyrdom of St. Sebastian.
Yes.
You look at the arrows there, they're crested,
Yeah.
and each archer's got his own crest, and the arrowhead on the end is a lovely Poitiers swept out.
Yeah.
So it's seen that,
Yeah.
I do forge them.
Yeah.
And the bows, they're correct. But he's a bit naughty because he had one chap with the arrow on the wrong side of the bow. Or was it? I don't know.
He might stir up hornets' nests.
But then there was there was another illustration, medieval one with a lady shooting a bow, and it was obvious it was a long bow, and it was you, but he'd painted it, and he'd put the sapwood on the belly.
Yes.
You see, so they do get it wrong at times, but most of them, no, they knew what they were talking about. Classic example is the Massachusetts Bible, and I've analysed all the weapons in that, and the person who did all the illustrations for that Bible knew his weapons like the back of his hand, because he didn't finish the Bible, somebody else took over, and you can see there's a line where he stopped, someone else took over. They weren't quite as accurate, reasonably so, but not as accurate as he was. He knew his weapons down to a fine art.
Yeah.
So look at medieval paintings, it's all there if you know where to look, but don't get thrown out of the National Gallery.
So you've done a lot of work for museums and, and television
over the years. Yes.
So could you maybe go into that a bit, sort of the highlights you might have?
Yes, the museums have been very good to me, been very tolerant, have allowed me to go into them and get not the stuff in the showcases up on the top, but down into the storeroom and go in there and measure. And of course, I like to repay them with one way. So the heads, they've had them. But the Royal Armourers, I've made a lot of heads for them and demonstrated for them in medieval conferences and things like that to show people just how they were made. And I've lost track now of the heads that I've made for various museums, but they're dotted about all over this country and on the continent, and in America as well.
Yeah.
Mary Rose, I've done a lot of heads for the Mary Rose. I used to go down there on a regular basis and demonstrate. I don't do so much of that nowadays because it's too much for me to do. But
it's not just arrowheads though. The first time I came across you was on a TV program about swords and sword making, and one time I was visiting here, you were making a really intricate spearhead. So it's all sorts of things.
Oh yeah.
So when did archery start for you?
For me?
Yeah.
Oh, when we were children, we all went and cut a piece of willow and a piece of binder twine, and then a thinner piece of willow to make a shaft.
Yeah.
And that was it.
So you shot all through your teens, early 20s,
childhood.
all the way? Yeah. Oh.
When I was 14, my sister bought me a book called The Archer's Craft by Adrian Elliott Hodgkins. And wow, that was my Bible. And it shows you how to make the bows and the arrows and some historic work as well. And he was making broadheads, not medieval broadheads, he was making them modern ones, fabricated up with blades. Guess who was doing it in the school workshop when the teacher wasn't watching?
I think you showed me one of those.
Yeah, I still have some of them. I was fabricating them up out of brass tubing and hacksaw blades for the blades. They worked. See, you know, and I made my first yew bow.
Yeah.
And I was shooting them, and the aim was to shoot from the top of the paddock to the bottom of the paddock, and everybody else thought I was absolutely mad, but I did it. And at that time you could hunt with the bow.
Yeah, with blunts.
And I've hunted with the bow.
Yeah, was it blunts in that?
It was small rabbits, hare, pheasant, not big game, because no, there wasn't any around where I lived in Lincolnshire at that time.
Yeah.
But yes.
That was outlawed in the 60s.
1960s, early 60s.
Yeah.
Later, no, earlier than that, 50s.
Was it?
Yeah. Yeah. And my family, my father was an excellent shot with the air rifle and the shotgun, and my brothers were too. But I was there with the bow, and the father used to say, "Oh, you're playing with those toys," you know. And he took me out one day, and there was a hare in its set.
Yeah.
And he said, "Right, well, go on then. Show me what you can do." And I shot, and he started to run towards it. I said, "You don't need to bother." And he got there and he said, "Ye gods, this is a dangerous weapon. Be careful what you're doing with it." You know, and you realise how accurate a bow could be.
Yeah.
But again, shooting the bow was only part of the skill. It's a totally different kettle of fish hunting.
Yeah.
You've got to know your animals, everything. But of course, we can't shoot and hunt with the bow now anyway.
Yeah.
We don't need to. At that time, yes, I was shooting for the pot. Nothing was wasted.
Yeah.
What's your favourite arrowhead to make?
My favourite?
Favourite arrowhead to make?
Golly, I like the Deviser's swallowtail because it's a beautiful looking head, but also its design is so brilliant because it's made as light as possible so that it won't gad when it's in flight, but it's also made with the cutting edges so long that it will do the maximum amount of damage. So you've got the lightness, you haven't got the areas, the surface area, and you've got the cutting edges. And I do like making those, yes.
Are they, how much time does one of those take?
How much time?
Yeah.
It usually takes me 3/4 of an hour to forge a Deviser's swallowtail.
Yeah.
But again, they're expensive, but they were years ago. You know, they were made specially for hunting, not the standard warheads.
No.
No, hunting heads were special then. And some of them do have a mark on them, the Smith's mark. And that's how special they were. On there. Yeah, in out of it to the two sides. But leaving plenty in the middle there. Now we can go on to the flaring stake, which I'm going to put a different one in. Working it out to those corners. You see, all the time pushing it out. Pushing it out. That is still far too thick. I like mine to go in with this spoon shape up. When I put it in the fire, less chance of burning the edges. Just thinning those edges down where the overlap goes. There we go. Now we can roll this one up nicely now. There, roll him over. Tuck that first side in. And it's rolled in nicely. That's not ½ inch because the Cressy head isn't ½ inch. It's around about 11 mil.
Okay.
Now I can then close that in now.
Yeah.
But cool that off. And just going to close that in there now. That's gone right in there.
Yeah, there's no hole there at the bottom of this
Yeah.
socket at all.
I just tidied that top up. Now you can see, look, Red, at the end, there's hardly anything to grind off that.
There's nothing to take off there at all, it's really fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's because it was the perfect shape before you
That
started
is
curving.
this end,
Yeah.
beginning, get that right,
Yeah.
that'll come right.
Yeah.
I think Simon is going to be your last apprentice, probably, through the guild.
My last, what I call, Simon's going, he's not going through the apprentice.
He's not okay.
Simon
Yeah.
is going what I call an improver.
Yes.
When
Yeah.
I feel that he's up to standard, he can apply directly
Yeah.
for the masters,
Yeah.
and he will have to do the criteria that's required.
Could you maybe talk about the syllabus for arrowsmithing? What's
Well,
expected?
he has to make not only all the various heads that you're liable to come across, and in particular one or two that are very difficult, but he has to produce one type 15 swallowtail off the anvil, not ground up, and one ground up and finished, a set of 6 type 16 London Museum type 16s, and a set of bodkins. You know, those are the minimum requirements to a standard. But he also has to give the knowledge of the history of the arrowheads, where they were made. He has to produce one arrowhead that he has gone in and measured and done all the research on, and proof of all the research, all written up and everything.
Yeah.
That's quite a lot to do.
But there's an awful lot to learn. But you're getting there. You're getting there. That's the important thing.
How do you feel about the future of your craft, like arrowsmithing, in particular?
Well, there are only 2 of us who are actually fully practicing at the moment. That's myself and Will Sherman. And Will is very, very good on the historic side of it and the research. The 2 of us, we've done quite a bit of research together.
Yeah.
Because he will come up with a question and we try and find the answer. Particularly a particular little head that's a sort of a little broad head, but it's made in 2 parts and it's very short.
Yeah.
Some of them were forged completely, but some of them were, the barbs were brazed on. And we know that they did braze in the medieval period because the proof is there. We've got heads that show the marks on them.
Yeah. For people who don't know, what is brazing, Hector?
What is brazing? It's joining 2 pieces of iron together using either a copper alloy or, that's the easiest.
So like a weld, almost.
Yeah.
But, so what's the process to do that?
Well,
how do you do it?
You have to have the parts going together have to be a good fit, tight fit, and B, they have to be clean, and C, you have to get them up to the melting point of the joining material.
Yeah.
And it does make a mess on your fire, but
quite tricky this time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Some of the arrowheads that you're making are not historical replicas, but replicas of some films. I've seen Lord of the Rings heads as well.
We're getting into the fancy world now.
Yeah.
Fanciful, yes. Fantasy.
Some of those can be fun to make as well, though.
Well, it's something I didn't want to do, but I kept being asked, can you make Lord of the Rings arrowheads? And I said, well, yes, I can, but I don't really want to. So I made 1 or 2 of the simpler ones, which, an interesting thing is they are based on Saxon period heads. So I've been basically making them anyway.
Yeah.
1 or 2 are a little bit more fancy and with a little bit of a Japanese feel about them. So I made them, but I didn't just forge them and that was it. I then put a good quality finish on them and blued them so that they look very posh. And I thought, well, that's it. But of course, I did put quite a price on them.
Yeah.
And I thought that'll be it. No, I won't get it. But they keep asking me for it. So I do have a full set of Lord of the Rings heads, forged as they would have been forged in the elven workshops.
So it goes back to the historical accuracy again.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
I don't know. You said something about when you're talking about the swallowtail head and its design, and it was the architecture of the head that you really appreciated. Is it that the fantasy ones don't have that same?
Oh yeah, they work.
Yeah, well, I'm sure they work. Are they as efficient? I don't know.
It's difficult to say because, as I say, they are based on
Saxon ones.
mainly on Saxon heads.
Like a leaf shape head.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Long, thin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's needle bodkin types.
Some of them are similar to
The,
fire arrows. Aren't
The Legolas Heroes head
Oh, yeah.
with the inlay in it.
Yeah.
Well, I say inlay. There's something on the surface,
Yeah.
which is an elven rune of some sort that gives its magical powers. So
They
you
work.
know, I do that. I do that by inlaying
Yeah.
another metal in it, either silver or brass,
Mm.
Yeah.
and then when it's blued, it shows up better.
Yeah.
But it takes a long time to do them. They're
Yeah,
fiddly.
sounds pretty
Is that
cool.
something that you see in historical spearheads, for example, or that kind of inlay?
Yeah,
Yeah. So
Yeah.
it is using
It is,
techniques
oh,
that are
yes.
historical.
it is. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah. I mean, for something from a film, they actually did do a bit of research and
Yeah.
what they created, not just the arrowheads, but a lot of it is based on
Oh yes.
actual
Yeah.
historical items. I've seen you make. Yeah, like Red was saying, you have made swords for television, as well as
Well,
yourself.
my
Maybe you could talk a little bit.
other
about
speciality is blades.
Yeah.
And when I was at college, I did my dissertation was the development of the sword
Mm.
in Western Europe, and there was very, very little written about
Yeah.
it at the time. The only person who was writing about it was Ewart Oakeshott, and he's written quite a few books. And it came to this Saxon swords with the pattern in them, which intrigued me. You know, we're talking about 1960,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I thought, I wonder if I could do that. And started messing about with it and made a pattern welded blade. In fact, it's over there on the bench at the moment. It's terrible, but it was my first attempt. And again, there was nobody doing it.
No.
And I gradually developed it and got more into, again, starting to do the research and then working with archaeologists, and the top archaeologist on Saxon blades is Brian Gilmore,
Mm.
and he was analysing them, doing cross sections, polishing it, micrograph, everything like that. And can I do the same?
Mm-hmm.
And so I then started to think, well, how would the Saxon smiths do it? There were people doing Damascus steel, which is totally different, where you get hundreds of layers.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the Saxon sword blades weren't done quite like that. And Ryan's analysis came up with the pattern bars that you use to make the pattern were either of 5, 7 or 9 layers of 2 different irons. Phosphoric iron
Yeah.
and a low carbon iron.
Mm.
And so I've experimented. There was one gentleman doing some experimental work, and I copied what he did, and yes, it worked, but it wasn't the way I thought that the Saxons would make it,
No.
because it was too complicated. And so I carried on, and I've worked out just how the Saxons did it, and made the blades, and not only made them, we've cross-sectioned them, compared them to originals, and they come out the same.
Wow.
So again, it's that, must be doing it right.
Yeah.
And very simple patterns in them. People talk about the chevron patterns, but if you look into the records of the swords and people talking about them at the time, that is never mentioned. It's rippling water, wiggling snakes, all sorts of things like that, very poetic. And I started by making a blade for BBC, Meet the Ancestors. They asked if I could do one.
Yeah.
And they wanted this chevron pattern. And I said, well, I can't guarantee there'll be a chevron pattern, but we'll do it. And at one point there was. But by the time you've flattened it out, then taken the surface down to a good finish, the pattern has changed, and you get this beautiful wiggling pattern. You see?
Yeah.
So I'm on the right track again.
Yeah.
Now, I keep it very basic, as I think the Saxon smiths would have done it. Owen Bush, who is the top man on Damascus steel and pattern welding, he has taken it far beyond that, and he is doing some beautiful work. But he's using modern materials, he's using a power hammer and a furnace and everything like that. Mine was done with the bellows and hand hammer, which the Saxons had.
Yeah. I mean, looking around your workshop, you don't really have much in the way of machinery. It's all very hands-on work that you do. And that's the way you prefer to work, obviously.
Yeah.
No power hammers.
No.
Like that.
Well, the power hammer was somebody with a big hammer.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, but when I'm making them, a lot of it, I don't want somebody else helping me. I don't need somebody else. A little bit towards the end, yes, but the most difficult part of doing a Saxon sword blade is when you have to weld the cutting edges onto the main body.
Yeah.
And for that, you have to be really in tune. And it will take me ages before I will say, okay, I'm going to do it. And you have to concentrate so hard, because if you burn those outer cutting edges, the blade's ruined. So you can't afford to have many, I won't say any, many mistakes. I haven't made a perfect blade yet, but neither did the Saxons.
Yeah.
They were full of flaws. We know from analysing them.
Yeah.
And it usually takes me 3/4 of an hour, full heat.
Really?
I have to wear a glove on each hand, otherwise my hands blister with the heat coming from that blade. And it takes 3/4 of an hour to weld those cutting edges on.
Yeah.
And at the end of it, I sit down in a pool of sweat.
Get the kettle on.
Yeah, absolutely.
I did have a little gadget to go on here that I could set, but the hammering on the anvil just made it move. It doesn't matter how tight you get it, it still moves. And I'm thinking, that's shorter. You can see how much quicker it is doing it in wrought iron.
Yeah.
As it flows.
It's much smoother in terms of the way it moves around.
So what's the harder part, forming the socket or the head?
So what is
What's
the,
the harder part? The
hardest part is making a good socket.
Socket, yeah.
Yeah,
That's what I
definitely.
thought you'd say.
Now when I dig this out of the fire, I've just got to tap the end on the anvil to seal the end off.
Okay.
Otherwise it will split. Well, I hope it will stop it splitting.
Is that something to worry about with wrought iron in particular?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Very nice. So that being medieval iron, that's different from kind of modern wrought iron.
Yeah, it's just the way it's made. Medieval iron is what we call smelted, where they get the bloom out of the furnace and hammer it up and keep hammering it up and get it down. With puddled iron, they puddle it, they turn it and turn it and turn it in a semi-molten state
Yeah.
to get the impurities out,
Yeah.
and then hammer it up. There's not a lot of difference. It depends on the quality of the iron or the iron ore.
Right. Yeah. So that's more of an impact on its
Yeah.
hardness and quality than
Yes.
the process.
Now you see, a lot of the medieval heads were made out of what we call phosphoric iron. That gets a sort of hardness on it, and you can harden the points. Non-phosphoric iron is much, much softer, much easier to work, and less chance of it breaking off. Phosphoric iron will snap like a carrot,
Yeah.
you know, whether it's hot or cold, but non-phosphoric won't. And the smiths years ago, even in Saxon times, they knew there were the two different types of iron.
Yeah.
Well, three, if you call steel hard iron.
Yeah.
So we've got non-phosphoric, we've got phosphoric, and we've got hard iron.
Were they case hardening iron?
It's debatable. Case hardening, I reckon they did them as we do with the points. They point harden them
Right.
by just getting it up to just under a white heat. And if you've got a charcoal fire, it absorbs the carbon.
Yeah.
If you quench it, that will be hard.
Yeah. It's trapping the carbon
Yeah,
in the point.
and that's all they need. They only need that point hard,
Yeah.
because that's the bit that's going to open into the armour, you see. If you case harden, you have to build a box, fireproof box, fill it full of carbon material, plus your heads, and you cook it for hours so that the carbon really penetrates. But that's carburizing.
Yeah.
They used to call it blister steel,
Okay.
because when you take it out of the boxes, the bars, they'd have big blisters all over them.
Huh.
And it makes very good steel.
Yeah.
And it's what they used in Sheffield
Yeah.
for years, until they started doing the crucible type with Huntsman.
And so modern case hardening compounds, they're
Yeah.
different again, aren't they?
You can case harden,
Yeah.
with a modern compound. I've got some of it up there. Of some of my fullers,
Yeah.
I've just case hardened those a bit.
Okay.
Just they will wear a little bit longer,
Yeah.
but be wary, it's nasty stuff.
Yeah. It's full of.
It's got all sorts in it.
Yeah. That's very different from arrowheads, then, isn't it? It's very.
Oh yes,
Yeah.
yes. It's far more physical
Yeah.
because you're using larger sections of metal,
Yeah.
much more heat,
Yeah.
and you need to be fit to do it. I don't think I don't know whether I'll ever make another Saxon sword.
How many have you made, do you think?
Oh, I've lost count.
That's always a good
But they're all
Yeah.
around the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, don't mind me asking, but how much would one of those set someone back?
The last one that I did, along with my friend Tim Blades, who's a silversmith jeweller,
Yeah.
is in Malmesbury, Athelston Museum, and that would work out at around about £6,500.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of time involved.
A lot of time.
Yeah.
It takes me, not from the very start, but from actually welding up the pattern bundles to the finished blade, around about 50 hours work. And in that time, I will have lost 50% of the metal that I started with. Now, this is something that nobody realised until I started doing this and recording it.
Yeah.
I was weighing pieces,
Yeah.
measuring them, weighing them, welding them up, measuring, weighing, and all the way through. And when I do a Saxon blade, that is how I do it. So you get a full picture of what is going on and what is happening. And as I say, the average is at least 50%,
That's incredible.
which is so expensive.
Yeah.
But that's not counting going from a bloom
Yeah.
to a billet. You lose 50% of the bloom
Yeah.
to get to a billet. Then you've got to forge the billets down into the length that you want, X section. And
I begin to see why iron things are so valuable.
and iron at that time was so precious.
Yeah. Yeah.
They were worth a king's ransom. That's why I did the Athelston sword. It's
Yeah.
a presentation one.
But it must be quite satisfying to get to the end of that and you have it.
Oh
finished
yes,
item.
yes.
It must just look stunning, I
Yeah.
imagine.
But as I say, I know it's got flaws in it.
Yeah.
But nowadays, you see, if you've got a modern furnace and it's all clean and modern materials, you can weld them up and you can get virtually perfect blades. But doing it this way, with charcoal and a hammer.
The old way.
Do you have a piece of work that you've done that you've learned the most from? Has it been something that sticks in your mind that has really been a good learning process to have made?
Oh golly, that is a difficult one. Each year, I would select what I would think was my favourite piece for the year,
Right.
but it could be anything.
Yeah.
One year it was a pair of medieval scissors,
Right.
and I
Yeah.
thought, yeah, that's this year's. It could be a sword blade, could be a Saxon seax blade, small one, and sometimes little tiny things. Like I did a few years back, a couple of years back, I was making Thor's hammers as pendants using pattern welded,
Wow.
so that the hammer head has got this patterning in it.
Yeah.
And yeah, they're sweet.
Yeah.
Nothing like just, it varies.
It doesn't have to be a huge, great thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The largest things that I've made were the gates at Charlton Park, the North Lodge gates,
Yeah.
and they're the big wrought iron gates.
Yeah.
The others I did, of course, was for the High Grove. But that's another story.
So, so if there was someone that wanted to get into historical smithing or arrowsmithing, where could you recommend they go? I know you've got a book, or maybe more than one book out, about arrowheads and the processes involved.
Yeah, and then my little book, it's only a little book.
Yeah, but
But
it's
it's a practical,
Yeah.
practical how they did it.
yeah.
Um,
There's no fluff there. It's all
Yeah.
the meat, you know.
Yeah. And it shows stages of making
Yeah, those
a bodkin and
yeah.
a devise's swallowtail.
And why they did things.
Yeah.
You know,
But you know, you can follow the instructions. As I know, I've done a video on making an ordinary bodkin, and people have said, "I've looked at your video umpteen times, but it never comes out the same," because they're missing these fine details, and it's the fine details that will make all the difference.
Well, it's like we were chatting earlier. I was saying I was still learning. Obviously, it's still
Yes.
learning every time I watch you make a head, because there's things that I see the first time, which are the most obvious things, and I'll go away and I'll practice that, and I'll come back and I'll see something else that's a very subtle difference. But I haven't actually learned enough to even see that until I come back and watch it again. Earlier when you were making the iron arrowhead and that tap of the iron against the anvil to seal the cracks in it, I mean, unless you mentioned that was going to happen, I probably wouldn't have seen that.
No.
And it's only with experience that you start to, a little bit of experience, that you start to see the more details of things.
Yeah. And it's like when you roll that socket up, you know, that first blow, when you bring it out the fire, once you've rolled it up and it's gone round, that first blow is so important. And if it doesn't go in just the right place, it won't roll like the one that I did when I said it's the worst one I've made today.
Yeah.
I didn't get it quite right.
Yeah. Well, it's because the camera was on you.
The camera won't notice it, don't they?
No. It looked fine to me, but you know.
Yeah.
It was a pleasure to watch you work, actually. And like Red was saying, me and Dave, it was about 18 months ago, we came up and did a day's forging with you. And we did watch you work then, but I was picking up things I obviously like sort of said, Red was just mentioning. It goes by so quick.
I know.
It's really easy to miss.
Yeah.
And you make it look so easy as well.
Yeah.
But then I've got Red, who is, you know, an improver, and I've got Ben, who is officially an apprentice, and I've got Matthew, who is also officially an apprentice, and it's a 3-year apprenticeship. But it's ever so difficult these days because they're not with me, and I know that Matthew has now got a job over in Nottingham with a firm, but he's got no facilities there for doing anything. So unless he comes home at a weekend, he can't progress, and he can't now come for the day with me. And you know, Ben can come, which is great, and I'm hoping that Ben will come because I want to see where Ben is, because I know he can make bodkins.
Yes.
So that's not the be all and end all.
No.
He's got to be able to do the others. Red has done very well because he's made 3 fluted heads.
Yes.
And they are not easy. It took me ages to work out how to do them. And I had little bits of metal chopped off all around the anvil on the floor. And no, that didn't work. No, that didn't work. Right, make a tool. Make this tool. Make it. No, that doesn't work. You know. You've got to have the time to do it. But eventually, I've worked it out. There was a German professor who worked out how he thought they made them. And he showed stage by stage. And yes, it worked. But at the end, he put his time down. 90 minutes. No,
Too long.
that's no good. If you can't do one in 20 minutes, it's not worth doing it. And so that's how long it should take to make one. 20 minutes.
And how fast for like a for a bodkin? What's a good time for like a simpler shape, you know, type 10 or something?
So they take
What's a good time for a type 10 or something?
type
simpler?
10.
I know
I'm
some
not as
people can
fast
make
now
them
as
very
I used
fast,
to be.
Yeah.
To make a type 10, it all dependent on the times you put it in the fire.
Yeah.
And once you get into a rhythm, then you can bring it down to, you can do a type 10 or a bodkin in 7 minutes. Having put so much time and effort into working out how these heads were made, okay, my method isn't the only method of doing them, but it's a method that works for me and gives a good quality head. I want to see it kept going now, and people like Ned and Ben and Matthew, I hope will keep it going. Will is doing an excellent job. He's running courses. There are one or two other people that run courses as well. So it isn't as though it's dead.
No.
Not when I started, to the best of my knowledge, there was no one doing it. And the first reenactors market I went to with my arrowheads to sell them, somebody said, "Oh, there's somebody round the corner selling them." So of course I went round the pad and looked, and it was a type 16, and I picked it up, and it was cast. It wasn't forged. And then I had an American come and he wanted a complete set of my heads, and so I made them for him. And next minute, they're coming in from India. He had taken them over there and was getting someone over there to make. You know, even my devices swallowtail, they were doing it as damn it.
Yeah.
Near as damn it exact, but they weren't splitting, they were MIG welding or arc welding, you know, and they just weren't the same quality. But that did hit the market for a while. But then I would be at, say, Tewkesbury Fair, and people would be going round and there'd be merchants selling the Indian stuff, and they get to mine and they go, "God, I wish I hadn't bought these." You know, and that was the difference. And long may that difference continue is all I can say.
Yeah. Well, I think that's probably good.
That's a good point.
Good point to stop at. Thank you very much for bringing something down with us. It's been very insightful. And where can people get a copy of your book?
Sorry?
Where can people get a copy of your book?
Or just email me.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I sent one over to Germany yesterday.
That's brilliant. It's a great little concise sort of packet of information there. So if anybody's interested in the process of making them, get a copy.
You know, the thing is, okay, I've done an extended edition of it, but already I'm thinking, well, I could have put this in, I should have said that, and should do so and so. I could expand that.
Third
You know.
edition coming out.
But I have a feeling that Will Sherman, he's also going to come with one, and it will be far more in-depth, scientifically, more research than mine is. Mine's just a very practical how to do it.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Hector.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good. I thought you never said.
Thank you. That was great.
That was budget.
Yeah.
Ooh.
It's nice to have an excuse to chat.
Yeah.